The date is the 18th of August 1976. At 10:30 am, a US Army 2.5-ton truck arrives at the site of a 98-foot tall poplar tree located in the Joint Security Area, which is right in the middle of the Korean Demilitarized Zone. A work party of 15 men pile out of the vehicle, including 5 members of the Korean Service Corps, or KSC, carrying axes. The KSC workers set up ladders and begin pruning the branches of the poplar tree, while 10 men, a mix of South Koreans and Americans from United Nations Command, stand guard. Americans Captain Arthur Boniface and Lieutenant Mark Barrett and South Korean Captain Kim Moon-hwan supervise the pruning. Within minutes, from the opposite side of the Sashon River, a truck drives across what is known as the Bridge of No Return, pulls up, and 11 unarmed soldiers from the Korean People's Army, or North Korean Army, exit the vehicle and approach the tree. Their leader, Lieutenant Pak Chul, demands to know what the work party is doing. Captain Boniface responds that they are simply pruning the tree. Lieutenant Chul agrees that this is a good idea, and his men stand around to watch the process, some even offering advice to the South Korean workers. However, at 10:47 am, the mood changes. It is unknown why, but a suddenly agitated Lieutenant Pak approaches Captain Boniface with a threat. If you cut down more branches, there will be big trouble. Boniface ignores the request and turns his back on the North Koreans. A runner is sent across the bridge, and 10 minutes later another North Korean army truck pulls up to the tree. 20 North Korean soldiers step out, and Lieutenant Pak gives Captain Boniface an ultimatum: "Stop working now or we will kill you." Before we see how this played out, a quick word on this week's sponsor, our very own Patreon. You may have seen among fellow history creators that views on long-form history content across the board are much reduced from even 12 months ago. The YouTube algorithm, which recommends our videos to people who might be interested in watching them, has been updated in a way which intentionally or otherwise suppresses recommendations of history content. With a team of people relying on the monetization that comes from views, and with fewer views with which to negotiate with sponsors, without which we can't produce videos full stop, this has become a major problem for us. Shorts, and YouTube's own ads, which we don't receive any revenue from, also now take up valuable space on the YouTube homepage that would ordinarily be used to recommend long-form content. YouTube's demonetization bots have now run completely out of control, with our second channel, The Intel Report, having been recently completely demonetized by mistake, only to be eventually reinstated after 2 appeals. We continue to be censored from mentioning certain words, people, events, and topics. You may have seen the farcical lengths that we had to go to in a recent video on the reasons for the Iraq War to not mention naughty words. With that in mind, this video is sponsored by our Patreon. We're uploading videos completely ad and sponsor free. We've launched a new Patreon exclusive Q&A series. I intend to also use Patreon as an exclusive release platform for any videos which get demonetized on YouTube. Absolutely no pressure at all, but if you'd like to support us to be able to continue making videos, it would be amazing. Please take a look at patreon.com/theoperationsroom. That's patreon.com/theoperationsroom. No problem at all if you aren't able to support us financially. We appreciate all your support since April 2019. This pruning incident is taking place in the midst of increased tensions between the Western-aligned United Nations Command and North Korea. The divided peninsula has been one of the front lines of the Cold War, following the 1953 armistice, which froze the war between the capitalist Republic of Korea and Communist Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The United Nations Command's task is to protect South Korea in the event of more communist aggression, and the Joint Security Area is the only area of the Demilitarized Zone where both sides come in close contact with each other. Located just south of the former village of Panmunjom, the Joint Security Area is where diplomacy, military negotiations and prisoner swaps are conducted between the UNC and North Korea. Members of both sides have freedom of movement within the area, and it is limited to 5 armed officers and 30 armed enlisted personnel per side at a time. The poplar tree by the Sashon River has proven to be a major point of contention between both sides. The tree must be pruned often because it blocks the line of sight between a UNC checkpoint and a nearby UNC observation post. Previous work parties have been harassed by North Korean soldiers, including an incident on the 6th of August, where US troops were held at gunpoint by Lieutenant Chul's men. Wayne Kirkbride, of the US 2nd Infantry Division, later recalled how, "We were told by North Korean soldiers that you cannot trim this tree because Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, personally planted it and nourished it, and it's growing under his supervision. Luckily, Captain Boniface was able to intervene and defuse the situation without bloodshed, but tension is ramping up again. On the 17th of August 1976, the day before the pruning, the North Korean government launches a diplomatic offensive on the United States. Along with 20 other communist nations, the DPRK submits a resolution to the United Nations, demanding the removal of all UNC troops and weaponry from South Korea. In Sri Lanka, North Korean Premier Pak Song-chul delivers a bellicose speech at the Non-Aligned Nations Conference, claiming that the UNC and South Korea are preparing to launch a war of aggression. The CIA believes this sudden belligerent rhetoric is designed to gain support from the non-aligned nations in Sri Lanka for the UN resolution. Furthermore, US President Gerald Ford is currently fighting off a primary challenge from California Governor Ronald Reagan at the Republican National Convention, and the DPRK's threats are seen as a way to sow division in the US on the verge of the 1976 presidential election. With this potential conflict boiling in the background, Captain Boniface has taken extra precautions to avoid a clash at the tree. There have been incidents in the Joint Security Area before, including a few occasions where both sides came to blows, and Boniface wants to be prepared for anything. He repositions a platoon of UNC soldiers closer to the worksite and deploys officers to the observation posts located around the Joint Security Area to increase surveillance. Additionally, 2 cameras are brought up and pointed towards the tree to ensure any North Korean aggression is caught on film. Finally, he decides he will call an immediate security officers meeting between the 2 sides if the North Koreans interfere with the pruning. Despite these precautions, the situation continues to deteriorate on the morning of the 18th of August. Lieutenant Pak, who has been nicknamed Lieutenant Bulldog for his many confrontations with UNC personnel, now has 35 North Korean soldiers facing the 15 men in the work party. He gives Captain Boniface one final warning to stop the pruning, and the workers hesitate and begin to put down their tools. However, Captain Boniface orders them to continue, and again turns his back to Pak. It is standard practice for UNC troops to avoid an armed confrontation by ignoring North Korean threats, and Boniface murmurs to Captain Kim of the South Korean army that Pak is bluffing. What he doesn't see is Pak taking off his watch and placing it into a handkerchief, while the other North Korean soldiers begin rolling up their sleeves. At just after 11 AM, Pak shouts, "Kill the bastards," and attacks Captain Boniface from behind. The North Koreans rush the work party, grabbing axes, wooden handles, and metal pipes, which were brought along by the pruners. Outnumbered and outarmed, the American and South Korean soldiers desperately attempt to defend themselves, while the pruners flee the scene. Captain Boniface falls to the ground and is bludgeoned to death by axes and wooden handles by Lieutenant Pak and 4 North Korean soldiers. One attempts to climb into the truck, but a GI smacks him in the head with a spare axe handle and tosses more handles to the rest of the UNC troops. Lieutenant Barrett runs towards the depression between the tree and the river, before leaping over a low wall to hide. The rest of the South Korean and UNC personnel fight their way to Captain Boniface's body and retrieve it before retreating back to the truck. They load his body only for more North Korean soldiers to storm the vehicle, trying to pull them out of the back. Another GI grabs a fire extinguisher and sprays it into one of the North Korean guards' faces, before chucking it at the man's head, knocking him out cold. A UNC truck from a neighbouring observation post pulls up and drives into the middle of the North Korean soldiers, forcing them to scatter. Lieutenant Pak and the North Koreans disperse, carrying 5 unconscious North Korean soldiers back with them over the bridge of no return. The entire fight has lasted just 30 seconds. Captain Boniface is dead, Lieutenant Barrett is missing, and 9 UNC personnel have been injured. Shortly after the North Koreans pull back across the bridge, the UNC force notices strange behaviour from one of the North Korean observation posts. A soldier is seen descending into the small depression next to the river with an axe, where they are out of sight from UNC personnel. After a few minutes, the soldier returns to the post and hands the axe to another man who repeats the process. They are taking turns in attacking Barrett with an axe. After an hour, a search and rescue squad is dispatched from the joint security area to find Lieutenant Barrett. They enter the depression to find his mutilated body, but Barrett is somehow still alive. He is retrieved and rushed to a hospital, but dies of his wounds en route. As night falls, North Korean soldiers armed with AK-47s gather on their side of the Bridge of No Return, while news of the attack makes its way to Washington. The entire attack has been caught on camera, just as Captain Boniface hoped. Hours after the incident, US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger informs President Ford of the situation. With President Ford busy with the Republican National Convention and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld recovering from surgery, he authorizes his cabinet to formulate a strong response. At around the same time, the North Korean government releases a statement accusing US troops in the joint security area of provoking the attack. The American imperialist aggressors sent in 14 hoodlums with axes into the joint security area to cut down the trees. Against our persuasion, they attacked our guards en masse and committed a serious provocative act of beating our men. Within 4 hours, Kim Jong-il, the son of the North Korean dictator, addresses the Conference of Non-Aligned Nations and formally introduces a resolution condemning the United States and demanding the withdrawal of all UNC troops from the Korean peninsula. The CIA deduces that the attack in the joint security area was a premeditated act aimed at weakening Western resolve for supporting South Korea. Secretary Kissinger chairs a meeting of the Washington Special Action Group and tells the assembled staff that the response must be a good lesson for the North Koreans. The important thing is that they beat 2 Americans to death and must pay the price. Kissinger recommends raising the defense readiness condition to DEFCON 3 for only the 3rd time ever and the first time since the Yom Kippur War 3 years earlier. In response, the North Korean government increases their defensive readiness, calling up reservists and conducting civilian air raid drills in the capital of Pyongyang. The tense situation seems to rest on a knife's edge. Kissinger and the cabinet, along with General Richard Stilwell, the Commander-in-Chief of United Nations Command in South Korea, begin debating their next course of action. It is agreed that the UNC will be significantly reinforced with F-4 Phantom fighters and F-111 strike aircraft. The USS Midway Carrier Task Group in Yokosuka, Japan, is ordered to prepare for immediate departure. However, Kissinger and Stilwell also want to send a more immediate and firm message that this behaviour will not be tolerated. Deputy Secretary of Defense William Clements pushes for a covert operation by Navy SEALs to destroy a North Korean military installation on the west coast of the peninsula. A sharp artillery barrage to destroy North Korean positions near the joint security area is also considered, but these ideas are ultimately shelved due to an unfavourable ratio of forces in the Panmunjom area. Should the North Koreans go on the offensive, the UNC forces in the area will not be able to hold them back. Furthermore, South Korean President Park Chung-hee is vehemently opposed to any course of action that could lead to open war. Instead, the Washington Special Action Group decides on a carefully orchestrated show of force to intimidate the North Koreans into backing down. The tree in the joint security area is to be cut down in a way that displays the United States' immense military might. Earlier plans to cut down the tree include ideas to blow it up with satchel charges, or bomb it using laser-guided munitions, but the action group decides on a different plan. At 7 AM on the 21st of August, a task force of 813 men from the US Army Support Group, a South Korean reconnaissance company, a South Korean Special Forces company, and sections of a reinforced composite rifle company from the US 9th Infantry Regiment will travel to the site of the axe murders in 23 vehicles to cut down the tree with chainsaws. Circling behind them outside of the DMZ will be 20 transport helicopters carrying an entire infantry company and 7 AH-1 Cobra gunships. High above them, nuclear-capable B-52 Stratofortresses will patrol the skies over the peninsula, escorted by US F-4 Phantoms and South Korean F-5 Tigers and F-86 Sabres. Another 12,000 troops are ordered to South Korea, while units stationed along the length of the DMZ are put on high alert. Bridges and bases near the DMZ are rigged for demolition should the North Koreans launch a full-scale invasion, and air defense assets are moved closer to the border in anticipation of enemy airstrikes. By the evening of the 20th of August, preparations are complete. The plan is codenamed Operation Paul Bunyan, after the mythical North American lumberjack and folk hero. Major General John Singlaub, the Chief of Staff for US Forces Korea, later said, "It was my estimate, shared by many of the staff, that the operation stood a 50-50 chance of starting a war." At 7 AM on the 21st of August, Operation Paul Bunyan commences. Without warning the North Koreans, the convoy of vehicles makes its way from Camp Kitty Hawk to the southeast of the Joint Security Area, to the site of the Axe murders. Named Task Force Vieira after its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Victor Vieira, a truck carrying 2 teams of engineers from Bravo Company and Charlie Company of the 2nd Engineer Battalion disembark. They climb onto the top of their truck and get to work felling the tree with chainsaws. The rest of Task Force Vieira assumes a defensive posture, and a truck is parked lengthways across the bridge of no return. Also accompanying the UNC task force are 64 men of the South Korean Army 1st Special Forces Brigade, armed with clubs and trained in Taekwondo. Among them is future South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who is serving in a reserve role. Upon arriving at the bridge, the South Koreans begin handing out M16 assault rifles along with M79 grenade launchers to the men setting up defensive positions with sandbags. 5 minutes after the operation begins, the UNC officially informs the North Koreans that a task force has entered the Joint Security Area in order to peacefully finish the work left unfinished. On the other bank of the river, the North Korean guards immediately call for reinforcements. A convoy of 5 buses, a truck, and even an old East German car carries 150 to 200 North Korean soldiers to the scene. However, they do not exit the vehicles, and instead watch the operation unfold. Lieutenant Colonel Victor now calls in his air support and the helicopters. B-52s, F-111s, and their escorting fighters crest the horizon, but do not stray across the DMZ. Instead, the aircraft aggressively charge towards the border, only to bank away at the last second, while dozens of transport and attack helicopters hover within view of the North Korean soldiers. The radio net north of the DMZ lights up as multiple North Korean outposts request instructions on how to handle this sudden escalation. Back on the ground, the North Korean men aboard the buses now exit and begin setting up 2-man machine gun positions, but continue to not interfere. For the next 42 minutes, the 2 heavily armed sides engage in a tense and icy standoff at the front line of the Cold War, while the engineers continue their high-stakes gardening work. The men of the South Korean Special Forces Brigade goad the North Koreans to cross the bridge, some even strapping M18 Claymore mines to their chests while holding their thumbs on the firing mechanism. Lieutenant Colonel Vieira is furious at the South Koreans' brazenness, but does not order them to stand down. The incredible display of aerial might visible in the skies above leaves a big impression on the North Koreans. One intelligence analyst monitoring North Korean radio traffic later recalled that the accumulation of force blew their minds. 2 concrete road barriers placed by the North Koreans are removed, while South Korean soldiers vandalize 2 unoccupied North Korean observation posts. Despite watching their positions being smashed up, the North Koreans continue to watch quietly without approaching the worksite. Finally, at 7:42 AM, the work is completed 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The 98-foot tall tree has been felled, and only a mutilated stump is left as a warning to the North Koreans. Just as quickly as they arrived, Task Force Vieira remounts their vehicles and exits the Joint Security Area. Staff Sergeant Charles Twardzycki is packing up his chainsaw when he looks towards the river. To his surprise, he sees a full platoon of South Korean commandos emerge from the bushes with faces painted, carrying grenades and automatic weapons that he had no idea were there. They were armed to the teeth, Twardzycki later said of the commandos, who had been secretly deployed there during the night without notifying the Americans. Although some shots were fired at a helicopter carrying General Morris Brady 3 hours later, the North Koreans have made no provocations anywhere else along the DMZ. Hours after the operation has finished, the North Korean government requests a meeting of the Military Armistice Commission to be held in the Joint Security Area. At the meeting, a senior North Korean officer delivers a message to General Stilwell from Kim Il-sung himself. It reads in part, "It is regrettable that an incident occurred. An effort must be made so that such incidents may not recur in the future." Although not a complete apology, this is the first time the DPRK has taken responsibility for violence along the DMZ, and the first time Kim Il-sung has sent a message to the UNC. North Korean media also takes a more conciliatory attitude, and its propaganda shifts from an escalatory tone to one of keeping the peace. Operation Paul Bunyan has accomplished its modest goal of chopping down a tree without starting a major war. On the 6th of September, both sides agree to divide the Joint Security Area and remove guard posts to ensure a similar incident will not occur in the future. The Joint Security Area's advanced base is renamed from Camp Kitty Hawk to Camp Boniface, in honour of the fallen American captain. The Readiness Centre within Camp Boniface is named in Lieutenant Michael Barrett's honour. In 1984, a swagger stick is made from the leftover wood for the commander of the US 8th Army. The stick has since been passed down to every 8th Army commander. The Baron's stump remains within the Joint Security Area for another 11 years, until it is finally cut down and replaced with a memorial. Thanks again to our amazing patrons whose support enables us to make these videos. Thank you to all our new patrons who joined recently, and a special thanks to our patron of the week, Luke Graham. Our patron, Insider Boop, supported this episode and would like to honour their fallen friend and veteran, Lieutenant Chris Moscow, aged 28, a Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal Platoon Commander to Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, who gave his life in Afghanistan on the 26th of April 2012 and was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. Each week we choose our favourite Patreon comments to shout out. This week, PFC Stupid says, "It would seem international politics have always been just as ridiculous as they are now. If you'd like to support us, please join our Patreon at patreon.com/The Operations Room and get access to exclusive benefits such as early access to videos completely ad and sponsor free. We'd love to have you as part of our community and really appreciate your support."